My dorm room was tiny. I mean, truly, laughably small. A perfect box made of cinder blocks, painted that cheerful institutional beige that somehow manages to feel both sterile and dirty at the same time. Room 7B, located on the 7th floor of Harrington Hall, one of the older, less renovated dorms on campus. I'd specifically requested a single when I applied for housing after my freshman year. Living with a roommate in that shoebox on the first floor had been an exercise in sustained irritation and boundary violation. I needed my space, my own four walls, however drab, especially now, deep into my junior year, with the weight of my thesis looming over me like a guillotine. This room, this small, unremarkable box, was supposed to be my haven, my place to focus, my sanctuary from the constant low-level hum of college life, the endless chatter, the late-night noise, the feeling of always being surrounded. It was my escape pod. Spring break. The campus had pretty much emptied out overnight. The usual tidal wave of students flooding the sidewalks, the dining hall, the library, had receded. The parking lots were half empty. The main quad looked like a ghost town. Harrington Hall, usually buzzing with a chaotic energy, was silent. Eerily, profoundly silent. The kind of silence that felt heavier than normal, pressing in on you. I figured there were maybe half a dozen other stragglers left in the whole building, scattered across the lower floors, plus the skeleton crew of RAs, probably bored out of their minds in their rooms. For me, though, it was perfect. 7 uninterrupted days, no distractions, just me, my books, my laptop, and the glorious, glorious quiet. 7 days to dive deep into my research, write like a fiend, catch up on sleep, and just breathe. Really breathe, without feeling crowded. The first day and a half were exactly what I had dreamed of. Utter, blissful peace. I slept late, woke up when I felt like it, didn't set an alarm, made coffee in my dinky little kettle on the desk, tasted like burnt plastic, but it was caffeine. Read articles for hours, spread out on my bed, surrounded by papers. Something I could never do when the room felt smaller with another person in it. Only left the room for essential supplies, quick trips to the nearly empty campus convenience store for microwave meals and more coffee. The quiet was everything I had hoped for. A deep well of calm I could finally sink into. It was the second night when that perfect quiet started to unravel. When things started to feel wrong. Subtly, at first. So subtly that for a long time, I questioned my own perception. I was sitting at my desk, maybe around 10 or 11 p.m. The only light in the room came from my laptop screen, casting that familiar blue-white glow on the wall and my hands on the keyboard. The rest of the room was dark. I was deep in my thesis, words flowing, finally making progress. And then I felt a sudden, sharp drop in temperature. It wasn't like the heater just turned off or a window had been opened. It was instantaneous. Like walking from a warm room into a walk-in freezer. The air around me got bone-chillingly cold, prickling my skin, raising goosebumps all over my arms and the back of my neck. I shivered violently, automatically reaching for the old cardigan I kept draped over the back of my desk chair, pulling it tightly around my shoulders. I glanced at the small thermostat unit on the wall near the door. It was set to a comfortable 74 degrees, and the heating unit wasn't making any noise, hadn't kicked on recently. The cold felt localized, concentrated. An intense pocket of frigid air centered precisely around my desk and chair. I stood up slowly, feeling the air around me. As I moved a few feet away from the desk towards the center of the room, the temperature felt normal. Standard dorm room air. But when I walked back towards the desk area, the intense cold returned, hitting me like a physical force field. It felt less like cold air and more like an absence of heat, a void that simply sucked the warmth right out of the space and out of you. I tried to rationalize it. Old building, Harrington Hall was notorious for its quirks. Maybe a weird draft coming from the window frame right there, even though it felt sealed. Maybe the ancient heating system was just having a localized spasm. I grabbed my thickest blanket off the bed and wrapped it around myself, trying to ignore the unsettling chill that seemed to penetrate deeper than my skin. I stayed at the desk for a little longer, wrapped in the blanket, trying to focus on my work. But the cold and the unsettling feeling that came with it made it hard. Every time I felt myself getting engrossed, the cold would just be there. A constant, unwelcome presence. Around midnight, I gave up on working, got ready for bed, turned off the laptop, the desk lamp, climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. The rest of the room was pitch black, just the dim light filtering in from the hallway under the door, and the faint glow from the streetlights outside the window. Tried to read by the light of my bedside lamp, but I was restless. The cold from the desk area seemed to linger in the air, a residual chill. Then I heard a sound. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a tap. It was a scraping sound. Faint, yes, but absolutely distinct, and it was coming from the floor, right under my bed. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It sounded like fingernails, long, sharp ones, or maybe tiny claws, dragging slowly, deliberately across the linoleum floor underneath the bed frame, trying to dig its way through the floor. My heart leaped into my throat, instant adrenaline. My entire body tensed, pulled my feet up under the covers so fast my knees probably hit the ceiling. My eyes were wide open in the darkness, staring intently towards the floor under the bed. "Hello," I whispered. My voice was barely audible, thin with sudden fear. The scratching stopped. Silence. Not the nice quiet from before, a heavy, listening silence, broken only by the sound of my own breathing, which was suddenly coming in short, ragged gasps. I stayed like that for what felt like an hour, rigid with fear, every muscle tense, listening with an intensity I didn't know I possessed. My ears strained, trying to pick up any sound over the pounding of my heart. But there was nothing. The scratching didn't resume. Eventually, slowly, exhaustion began to override the terror. My muscles relaxed bit by bit. I told myself it was just the building settling, old pipes, something moving in the walls or the floorboards, normal old building noises amplified by the silence and my own nerves. Eventually, I drifted into a restless, anxious sleep. The next day, the cold spot around the desk was gone. The room felt a consistent temperature. I tried hard to convince myself that the cold and the scratching were just products of my tired mind, amplified by the isolation and the sheer quiet of being alone in the dorm during break. A weird atmospheric anomaly combined with sleep-deprived paranoia, but the memory of that scraping sound under the bed lingered, an unpleasant itch at the back of my mind that I couldn't quite scratch away. That evening, as darkness fell outside, the feeling of being watched returned. It wasn't just a vague sense of unease this time. It felt specific, like eyes were fixed on me from somewhere in the room. I scanned the small space again, my eyes darting from one corner to the next. My bed, the desk, the dresser, the closed closet door, the blank cinder block walls covered with posters. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. It was just this small box. I tried to sit at my desk and work on my thesis again, opened my laptop, looked at the document, but I couldn't focus. The feeling of being watched was too strong, too distracting. Every time I forced myself to look away from my laptop screen, my eyes would automatically flick around the room, quickly scanning every surface, half expecting to see something there, a shadow that wasn't a shadow, a shape that didn't belong. Then, something moved. My eyes flicked instinctively towards the far corner of the room, near the closet door. One of my sneakers, just a beat-up Converse, probably 3 years old, stained and worn. I was absolutely certain I had left it neatly tucked under the dresser earlier that day, right beside its mate. Now it was sitting a foot or so out in the open, its laces slightly tangled, sitting on the bare linoleum floor. My blood ran cold. A sudden, ice-cold shock. I hadn't touched it, not since I got back from my walk to the convenience store earlier, and I was the only one in the room. There was no other person in here with me. I stared at the sneaker for a long moment, my mind reeling, struggling desperately to process what I was seeing. Had I subconsciously kicked it out when I sat down earlier? No. I was sitting at my desk, completely across the room from the dresser. It was impossible. A wave of cold dread washed over me, physical and nauseating. It was the same intense, bone-chilling cold from the night before, but this time it seemed to emanate directly from the corner where the sneaker lay. The air in that spot felt heavy, charged. I slowly got up from my desk, my movements stiff, my eyes fixed on the sneaker. As I took a hesitant step towards it, it moved again. Not a dramatic jump, not a sudden lurch, just a slight shift. A subtle, deliberate sliding motion across the floor, maybe an inch or two. It was undeniable. My eyes were fixed on it. I saw it with absolute clarity. The sneaker just slid. I gasped, stumbling backward, hitting the side of my desk. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, terrifying drumbeat in the sudden, profound silence of the room. The distant city sounds, the low hum of the campus machinery, the quiet sounds of the building settling, they all seemed to have vanished completely. The silence wasn't just an absence of noise, it felt like a vacuum. I backed away from the desk, my body trembling, until my back hit the opposite wall, near the door. My eyes darted around the room, scanning every shadow, every corner. The air was thick with that frigid cold, emanating strongly from the area near the closet. The feeling of being watched intensified, becoming almost physical, like a heavy weight pressing down on me, scrutinizing my every move. Then, the closet door, which I was certain I had left slightly ajar earlier in the day, slowly began to swing open. It didn't creak on its hinges. It didn't groan. It just opened, silently, deliberately. The gap between the door and the frame widened, revealing the dark interior filled with my hanging clothes, a jumble of fabric in the gloom. My breath caught in my throat. A choked sound escaped my lips. I couldn't move my feet. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear, staring at the widening gap in the closet door. My eyes were wide, fixed on the darkness within. A shape began to emerge from the darkness inside the closet. It was indistinct at first, just a deeper distortion within the shadows, a concentration of darkness against darkness. But as it stepped out of the confines of the closet and into the slightly lighter space of the room, it took on a more definite form. It was tall and incredibly thin, unnaturally so, draped in a deep, inky blackness that seemed to absorb the very light around it, making it appear as though it was a void in reality. It moved slowly, deliberately, its form wavering slightly, like heat haze rising from hot asphalt, or like it was made of smoke that couldn't quite hold its shape. It came to a stop just outside the closet, its form looming in the center of my tiny room. It didn't make a sound. No footsteps, no breathing, no rustle of fabric. But I felt an intense, overwhelming presence radiating from it. A palpable wave of something malevolent, something deeply sorrowful, something ancient and wrong. It felt like pure, concentrated despair and anger. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. My mind was screaming at me, "Run! Get out! Scream! Move!" But my body refused to obey. It was locked in place, held captive by my own overwhelming fear and the terrifying presence that had invaded my space. I felt like a bug pinned under a magnifying glass. Then, the figure raised a hand. It was long and skeletal-looking, impossibly thin, shrouded in the same inky blackness that composed its form. It slowly, deliberately, raised this hand and pointed a long, shadowy finger directly at me. And at that exact moment, I felt a searing pain, a burning sensation, intense and sudden, on my left arm, like someone had pressed something red-hot against my skin. There was nothing there that I could see, nothing touching me, but the pain was real, sharp, and agonizing. I screamed, a choked, strangled sound that was swallowed by the oppressive silence in the room. The pain, combined with the sheer terror of the figure and its gesture, finally shattered my paralysis. I scrambled away from the wall, stumbling backwards, tripping over my own feet in my haste, scrambling towards the door, my eyes still fixed, horrified, on the looming figure in the center of my room. As I reached the door, I fumbled frantically with the lock. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grasp the doorknob, the keycard slipping from my trembling fingers. I dropped it, my heart hammering, and had to slap the floor blindly, frantically searching for it in the dark. Found it, swiped it wildly at the lock, the little light turning green. I yanked the handle down. The figure didn't move from its spot, but the cold intensified around it, reaching out like tendrils. It felt as if the figure was becoming more predatory, more hungry. I pulled the door open with a frantic lurch and scrambled out into the empty hallway, slamming the door shut behind me with a force that probably echoed through the silent floor. I leaned against it, my back pressed against the solid wood, gasping for breath. Tears from pure fear rolled down my face, my body trembling from head to toe. The hallway was silent, dimly lit by the bland overhead fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. It looked utterly normal, mundane, like nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened here. But I knew what was in that room. I had seen it. I had felt it. I had felt its touch. I stood there for a long time, shaking, trying to force air into my lungs, trying to calm my racing heart. The initial wave of raw panic gradually subsided, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and a chilling, absolute certainty that I could not, would not, go back in there. Not for anything. I ended up spending the rest of the night in the common room on the first floor. It was brightly lit, furnished with worn sofas and tables, vending machines humming in the corner. I huddled on a couch, wrapped in the blanket I'd had on me when I left my room, the harsh overhead fluorescent lights providing a fragile sense of security against the darkness and whatever might be lurking in the silence upstairs. I didn't sleep, not a wink. Just sat there, watching the security camera feed on the small monitor near the RA's office, which was dark and empty, jumping at every creak of the old building, every distant sound. I didn't tell anyone what happened. How could I? How do you explain seeing a shadowy figure emerge from your closet, feeling a searing, invisible burn on your arm? Who would believe me? They'd think I was stressed, sleep-deprived, making things up because I was alone for spring break. I couldn't bear the thought of someone looking at me with pity, or worse, with doubt. The next morning, as soon as the sun was fully up, casting weak light through the common room windows, I went back up to the 7th floor. I had to get my stuff. Packing was a frantic blur. I unlocked the door to 7B with a trembling hand, pushing it open slowly, my eyes darting around the room, expecting something. The room felt cold, heavy, even in the daylight. I didn't see anything. The sneaker was back under the dresser. The chair was still by the desk. The closet door was open just as I usually left it. But I felt its presence, a lingering chill that clung to the air, a wrongness that permeated the small space. I moved quickly, grabbing clothes, books, my laptop, throwing them into my suitcases with no attempt at organization. I felt a constant pressure on my back, the feeling of being watched never leaving me until I was out of the room, yanking the door shut behind me for the final time. I checked out of Harrington Hall later that morning, well before my scheduled departure date. I mumbled something to the confused student working the desk about a sudden family emergency requiring me to leave immediately. I couldn't bring myself to look back at the building as I walked away. I never finished that thesis on time. I struggled to focus for weeks afterwards, the images from that night replaying in my mind. The feeling of that cold, empty presence. The impossible movement of the sneaker. The silent, terrifying opening of the closet door. The figure. The burn on my arm, which wasn't there physically, but felt real for days. I never stayed in a dorm room again after that. And for a long time, I avoided hotels too. Any unfamiliar room, especially when I was alone, would trigger that same knot of fear in my stomach. I'd check under the bed, check the closet, scan the corners of the room before I could even begin to relax. Sleep became difficult, haunted by the memory of that silent, waiting darkness. Even now, years later, if I'm alone in a quiet room and I feel a sudden, unexplainable chill, or hear a faint, unidentifiable scraping sound, my heart leaps into my throat. The memory of Room 7B and whatever terrifying entity shared it with me that spring break is permanently etched into my mind. It taught me that sometimes the most frightening places aren't crumbling mansions or remote cabins. They are the small, ordinary boxes where you are most vulnerable, the places where you think you are safe and completely alone, until you discover, in the most terrifying way imaginable, that you are not, and the things that haunt you might not need to whisper or tap to make their presence known. They just need to show you, in the terrifying silence, exactly what they are. And that, I promise you, is far, far worse.
My name is Gary. I've been working the overnight shift for campus security at Prairie Technical College for 6 years now. We're located out near the edge of southwestern Wisconsin, a quiet stretch of farmland and rolling hills. It's not a big city campus, more of a local school with mostly commuter students. Most nights are uneventful, predictable. Empty classrooms, silent labs, the occasional late class finishing up or assisting a student who's locked out of their vehicle. 99% of the job is simply patrolling, securing buildings, filing reports on minor issues like burned-out exterior lights or minor vandalism. But that remaining 1%, that's the part that stays with you. It's the reason I still consider seeking a different line of work each morning when my shift ends. The majority of our campus facilities are relatively modern, practical, functional brick buildings constructed in the late 70s and 80s. However, there's a section on the north end, situated on a slight rise overlooking the main parking area, that's considerably older. This is the original part of the college, dating back to its establishment as a small agricultural and trade school in the late 1800s. We simply refer to it as Old Main. It's a single, rather imposing stone structure with a small, somewhat neglected courtyard out front, framed by overgrown hedges and several ancient, weather-beaten oak trees. It possesses an appearance more akin to a historical, perhaps even foreboding building than part of a technical college. It houses some administrative offices that see very little traffic, a dusty archives room, and spaces that were once lecture halls but are now primarily used for storage. None of the guards like patrolling Old Main, especially the newer guards. They frequently mention uncomfortable cold spots, peculiar echoing sounds that seem to originate from nowhere, and a persistent feeling of being watched. I used to dismiss these complaints as normal reactions to being in an old building at night. I'd tell them to maintain focus on their duties and disregard the minor disturbances. My patrol vehicle is an older model Ford Ranger truck. It's reliable, though not particularly quiet. It was Wednesday night after the last evening classes concluded. I conducted my usual rounds through the main campus buildings. The automotive center retains a lingering scent of oil and welding fumes. The health careers building is clinically silent. The student services building sits empty under harsh fluorescent lighting. Finally, around 1:30, I drove the truck up the short, winding access road leading to Old Main. As you approach the building, you can sense a distinct change in atmosphere. The air feels different, colder, not merely a drop in temperature, even during the warmer months. It's a different kind of cold. It feels thin, as if the air itself is less dense, or perhaps something else is occupying the space. I parked the truck on the small paved area before Old Main and exited the vehicle. The silence out here was profound, broken only by the cattle from a nearby farm and the rustling of leaves in the old oaks. I started my walk around, scanning with the beam of my heavy-duty flashlight along the stone walls, examining the ancient wooden doors. They were solid oak, reinforced with iron fittings, and securely locked, just as I had found them on the prior shift. Every potential entry point was sealed. As I rounded the corner of the building, moving from the front courtyard towards the side that overlooks the nearby farm fields, My flashlight beam swept across the large, arched windows on the ground floor. They were dark, reflecting the night sky and the faint, distant lights of the college and the town below. Continuing scanning the building, my flashlight lit up one specific window, located about halfway along the side of the building. As I scanned the window, I froze in terror. I saw a face pressed directly against the glass from the interior. It was pale and somewhat indistinct in the limited light, appearing nearly featureless at first, but undeniably a face. It seemed flattened against the pane, eyes wide, staring out into the darkness. It was staring directly at me. My heart immediately began to race. I stopped abruptly, my flashlight beam fixed on that spot. The face remained motionless. It simply stared. My thoughts raced, attempting to find a logical explanation. Was it a student? A trespasser? But how could they have gained entry? All the doors were locked from the outside. I had verified this just minutes earlier. And why would someone stand there like that, pressing their face against the glass? It didn't look like a normal person. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud and echoing in the stillness. "Campus security! Step away from the window!" The face showed no reaction. It remained there, a pale, silent mask pressed against the glass. It wasn't aggressive or threatening in an obvious way. Just there, watching. A surge of adrenaline combined with something colder, something akin to pure fear, coursed through me. This felt distinctly different from a routine security check. It felt wrong. I grabbed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Guard 1, reporting suspicious activity at Old Main. Possible intruder located on the ground floor, requesting immediate backup." My voice was rough, reflecting the tension I had felt. My hand trembled slightly as I held the radio. Standard procedure dictates a direct approach to assess the situation. But there was something about that face. It was unsettling. It lacked any expression of fear, defiance, or even curiosity. It seemed empty, as though I was looking at an empty shell. As I finished my transmission, my flashlight beam still directed at the window, the face began to move slowly. It didn't withdraw from the glass or turn its head. It began to slide downwards along the window pane, almost like melting wax. The features seemed to liquefy and drip downwards, stretching and distorting into something elongated and thin and utterly devoid of features before vanishing completely below the windowsill. It happened so fast, smoothly and silently, like a horror movie scene. I gasped, stumbling back a few steps. My flashlight wavered erratically for a moment before I managed to stabilize it, directing it back at the now empty window. What in the world had I just witnessed? My breath was shallow. I backed further from the window, alert, scanning the dark facade of Old Main. The other windows remained dark, reflecting only the typical surroundings. I stood there for a while, breathing heavily, attempting to process the impossible image imprinted on my mind. No rational explanation fit what I observed. That was undeniably a face, and it had slid down the glass as if it were a viscous fluid. Backup arrived about 15 minutes later. It's a considerable distance from the main security office across campus, and even further for local sheriff's deputies if they were actually required. 2 younger guards arrived in their truck, their initial eager expressions quickly replaced by apprehension when they looked at me under the truck's headlights. "What's the situation, Gary? Dispatch reported you requested urgent backup at Old Main." Kevin, one of the younger guards, asked, his voice a bit too loud, attempting to project confidence. "Yeah," I managed, my voice still hoarse and dry. "In that window right there," I pointed, my hand shaking slightly. I saw a face pressed against the glass. It slid downwards. They exchanged a look. Kevin's initial confidence seemed to diminish noticeably. "Are you sure, Gary?" Old Main looked secured tight. It always is. "I know what I saw," I replied, perhaps more sharply than intended. My nerves were shot. "There was someone inside, or something. I witnessed it." We decided to conduct a thorough exterior sweep first. We walked slowly around the perimeter of Old Main, shining our flashlights into every window we could access, examining every door, every possible point of entry. Nothing was found. No broken glass, no signs of forced entry, no indication that anyone had entered or exited the building. The heavy oak doors remained securely locked from the outside. The building appeared sealed. "Perhaps you saw your reflection, Gary?" Mike, the newest guard, suggested, his voice cautious. I just stared at him. "My reflection could not behave like that, Mike. It doesn't slide down glass like it's liquid." They exchanged another look. They didn't offer any other suggestions, though I could sense their skepticism. They remained silent, but the doubt was palpable. We radioed dispatch again. We reported no signs of forced entry. No immediate threat was visible from the exterior. Dispatch advised us to await further instructions, reiterating that police backup was en route. Standing there in the quiet courtyard, the three of us, our flashlights cutting through the gloom, the air felt even colder now, causing my skin to prickle. The silence was not merely an absence of noise. It felt like a presence, a pressure in my ears as though something was listening to us. Then, from deep within Old Main, we heard a low thump. It was not a loud sound, but in the absolute stillness of the night, it resonated like a muffled impact, as though something heavy and solid had struck the interior floor. It seemed to come from somewhere within the upper levels of the building. We all froze. Kevin and Mike exchanged wide-eyed glances. Their earlier skepticism appeared to dissipate a bit. "Okay," Kevin whispered, his voice tight with fear. "It sure sounds like there's something in there. That was not the building settling." Dispatch authorized us to attempt entry, but to proceed with extreme caution and to await police assistance if we encountered anyone physically present and resistant. Gaining entry to Old Main was not a simple process. It required a specific master key rarely used, a heavy iron bolt on the main entrance that groaned with age as I turned it, and the thick oak door itself, which swung inward with a low, sorrowful creak, revealed nothing but complete darkness within. The air inside struck us with an immediate, intense coldness. It was profoundly colder than the outside air, even on a crisp Wisconsin night. The scent of dust and age hung heavy, musty, and ancient, mixed with that other odor, an unpleasant tang, like old copper. It was nauseating. Our flashlights penetrated the absolute blackness of the main hall, illuminating dust motes dancing like agitated particles in the light. "Clear," Kevin announced, his voice echoing unnaturally in the vast, empty space. His flashlight beam swept across the high ceiling. We moved further inside, our footsteps echoing loudly on the stone floor of the foyer. The silence pressed in, seemingly amplifying every sound we made. Our breathing, the shuffling of our boots, the faint click of our flashlights. Another thump. This time, closer. From the floor, directly above us, the second level. It sounded like something heavy had been dropped or had fallen, a dead weight striking wood. We climbed the wide, sweeping staircase slowly, our flashlights scanning left and right. The second floor was a labyrinth of dark, dusty lecture halls and smaller office-like rooms filled with forgotten equipment. The air remained frigid, and the metallic odor grew stronger as we moved deeper into the building, a faint, coppery taste lingering in the back of my throat. As we walked down a long corridor lined with closed doors, we heard another sound, a dragging sound. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct, as though something heavy was being pulled across a wooden floor. It seemed to have originated from behind a door located on our left, about halfway down the hall. We all stopped abruptly, trying to hear it better. The dragging sound seemed to stop the moment we froze. My mouth felt dry with sudden fear. This was not merely the sounds of an old building. This was something inside the building, seemingly toying with us. We approached the door cautiously. Like most of the doors here, it was unlabeled, a plain wooden door indistinguishable from others along the corridor. I tried the handle. It was locked securely. "Maybe they have locked themselves inside," Mike whispered, his voice tense with apprehension, echoing a thought I'd had earlier. "Or perhaps," Kevin replied, his voice low, "they're trying to prevent something else from escaping." He voiced the far more terrifying possibility. I fumbled for the master key again. My hands were visibly shaking now. I inserted the key into the old lock, turned it, the mechanism clunking as it unlocked, and pushed the heavy wooden door open, slowly, inch by agonizing inch. Our flashlight beams lit up the room. It was a small, cramped office filled with stacks of outdated textbooks, a dusty desk, and a single wooden chair overturned on the floor. Otherwise, it was empty, completely devoid of any living person. However, in the center of the dusty wooden floor, leading from the area near the overturned chair towards the far wall, was a clear trail, a wide scrape etched in the thick dust, as though something heavy with rough edges had been dragged across the floor. And at the end of the scar near the far wall was a dark, irregular stain on the wooden floorboards. Under the beam of my flashlight, it seemed to have a faint shimmer, almost as if it were wet, though logically, that was impossible given the dust accumulation. And the metallic, coppery odor was most intense here, nearly overwhelming, making me feel nauseous. We exchanged horrified glances. This was not simply dust disturbed by old furniture rearrangement. This was fresh, and that stain. What is that?" Mike whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the dark mark on the floor. I didn't have an answer, but a terrible cold certainty settled over me, deeper than the frigid air in the room. This building wasn't merely old. It felt like a wound upon the landscape. And whatever had occurred here, whatever had left that stain and that drag mark, it wasn't done, and it was still present. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the floor directly above us, on the third level. It sounded as though a stack of chairs, or maybe a piece of furniture, had been tossed across a room. It felt like an outburst of pure rage. We scrambled out of the small office, pulling the door shut behind us with a decisive thud. We locked it. The silence in the hallway felt significantly more oppressive now that we understood what kind of force was potentially inside the building with us. What power was capable of moving objects with such violence. "We need to check the next floor," I told them, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. Unfortunately, logic told me we needed to clear the building, ensure no one was actually trapped or injured. But every instinct I possessed screamed at me to retreat to the safety of the guard shack. We climbed to the third floor. The metallic odor thankfully diminished somewhat up here. It consisted mostly of smaller offices and storage rooms. As we proceeded down the narrow corridor, our flashlights sweeping ahead, we heard a new sound, one more profoundly disturbing than the others. A low, guttural moan. It definitely didn't sound human. It was deeper, rattling, as though something was struggling desperately for breath or experiencing agonizing pain. It came from behind one of the doors near the end of the hall. We stopped outside the door. "Storage room 3A, the faded label read. The moaning continued, a slow, drawn-out, agonizing sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards and into our teeth. Kevin attempted the handle. It was locked. We looked at each other, fear evident on all three faces. Should we open it? After what we had witnessed on the lower floors. The face at the window, the drag mark, the stain, the violent crash from above. The moaning abruptly stopped. The silence returned, heavy and expectant, thicker than it had been at any other point. Then, from inside the room, we heard a sharp, wet sound, like the impact of something heavy and wet being dropped onto a hard surface. A distinct splat, followed by that familiar thump again. It was as though the sound was traveling upwards through the floorboards from the room below. I felt a profound coldness, deeper than the air around us. We radioed dispatch again. We described the sounds, the unsettling atmosphere within the building, the overwhelming, palpable feeling that we were not alone, that something genuinely inexplicable and wrong was happening inside Old Main. This time, the dispatcher sounded shaken, her voice losing its professional composure. She confirmed that local sheriff's deputies were now close to arriving and advised us to maintain our position, remain together, and absolutely do not enter any other rooms until backup is on scene. We slowly backed down the hall to the top of the stairs on the 3rd floor, our flashlights directed down the darkened corridor. The air here was slightly warmer than on the lower floors, the metallic odor thankfully less intense, but the silence was thick, listening, pressing in on us. We could feel the weight of the building around us, the burden of its history, and the presence of whatever shared it with us in that moment. We stood there for what seemed like forever, every nerve on high alert. We heard nothing else from room 3A and nothing from the other floors. Only the heavy, oppressive silence of Old Main, the faint, distant sounds of the rural night, and the frantic pounding of our own hearts. When the sheriff's deputies finally arrived, their vehicle lights joining ours in illuminating the night sky, they conducted a sweep of the building with us. We showed them the stain in the office on the 2nd floor. They documented it with photographs, examined the area with powerful flashlights and some special thermal cameras. They found nothing. Nobody was in the building with us. They couldn't provide an explanation for the stain. The samples sent to the state lab were later reported as inconclusive, indicating organic material, but too degraded to identify, certainly nothing recent. They could not explain the drag mark, nor the sounds we had heard. Their thermal cameras registered no heat signatures in the locations where we had felt the intense cold spots. The official police report was inconclusive. It cited unexplained noises with suspected vandalism, though noted the lack of evidence of forced entry or damage, and mentioned the mysterious stain samples pending further analysis. There was no mention of melting faces, dragging sounds, or agonized moaning. I wrote up my own report, detailing every observation, noise, and experience, including the face at the window, knowing how improbable it would sound in an official document. My supervisor reviewed it, regarded me with a mixture of concern and skepticism, and strongly recommended I take a few days off. I took the leave. However, those images are permanently etched into my memory. The face at the window, its impossible descent, the distinct drag mark in the dust, the dark, unsettling stain on the floor, the agonizing moaning from behind the locked door on the 3rd floor, followed by that distinct, wet thump. Occasionally, late at night, when the farmlands are quiet and the moon is full, I find myself looking up at those arched windows on the ground floor of Old Main. And sometimes, just for a second, before I quickly divert my flashlight beam, I swear I see something in the window, a pale shape in the darkness, just watching. And the air around my truck seems to grow colder, the silence deeper, as though Old Main is holding its breath, waiting for someone to return to its dark interior, waiting for me. And sometimes, just for a second, before I quickly divert my flashlight beam, I swear I see something in the window, a pale shape in the darkness, just watching. And the air around my truck seems to grow colder, the silence deeper, as though Old Main is holding its breath, waiting for someone to return to its dark interior, waiting for me.